So we are here together to talk about API Request Builder, and I also appreciate the help of Jeremy, my colleague, who is going to be helping out with the questions. So speaking of questions, please use the question window to ask your question whenever it occurs to you, and then we will cover them. We'll have time at the end to make sure we cover your questions if they haven't been covered in the meantime during the talk. So first off, a couple slides about what is an API Explorer. What are we talking about here? So to me, an API Explorer makes it easy to try out an API. And an Explorer to me is a tool for making live calls to the API endpoints or the API methods. They are sometimes called an API playground. And so here's an example of one where you can choose the parameters for the API method and then click test to try it out. Okay, so what are the benefits? First off, 0 to hero, quickly try out the API without writing a program or a script. And to help out the developer the best, what we're looking for is a select box, for instance, rather than typing the words yes or no, where you can see here, this is a Boolean, and it's shown as a checkbox rather than saying yes or no, that kind of a thing. Now, there are some API explorers where they offer you the option of providing input via a text area for creating the request. And these days, virtually always we're talking about a JSON request. So benefits of having a text area like this, first off, is that it's very easy to just copy it out of the tool and save it and use it later. Also, it's very straightforward to understand what are the nested objects. So for instance, here, amount is an attribute at the top level, but amount is not set to a simple scalar value. Instead, it's set to an instance of an object where that object itself has 2 attributes of currency and value. And payment method is also being set to an object here. So this works for nested objects, but it can get complicated if the nesting starts getting a little bit large, as we'll see. Now, an issue is that you need more thinking. It's much easier to make an error, and it's no longer really click and go. You have to make sure that you're typing things just correctly. So, and further to that, a problem is that with the text format, there's no guardrails. You're really programming. You're programming the JSON request object and then submitting it. Now, in this example, which is a relatively simple envelope create example, you can end up with quite a few levels of nesting, as you can see down here via the braces, which are the end of a object, and the brackets, which are the closing off an array. So for instance, checkbox tabs is an array of checkbox tab objects, a singular, and it's got exactly 1. So this can get things to be a bit more complicated. So my #1 goal for designing and building the API request builder is I wanted to have it be click and go, easy request creation. I wanted to support deeply nested API attributes, including arrays and objects in a easy to use manner that minimizes mistakes. So let's see what we've got. So here we go for a live demo. And what you can see here is that you want to put in the address of apirequestbuilder.docusign.com. And I'm going to send this to everyone right now. And so let's do that. Okay, here we are. So we log in, and you want to log in with your developer account. That's your free Docusign developer account. So I will just do that here. And it starts up. And what we're seeing here, this is the default. Now, what your first thing to do really is to say send envelope. I'm going to make some changes first. But if you're trying it out at home, do send envelope. Now, if you don't see send envelope, that's because it's your window is too narrow. It's available down here But the easier thing that I would recommend is widen out your browser so you can see send envelope. Okay, so there's immediate changes between this section, which is where I call the diagram, and this section where you can see either the JSON or a particular language. And these are connected. So if I, for instance, here is the email subject, and right here is the email subject in the JSON request. So if I start changing it and add something, you can see that it was changed here immediately. So now let's change this. This default, you could just send it, but we're going to change it. We're going to add a tab. We're going to add a date sign tab. So we click here, and then we start with the container up at the top, the container block. And you can see it does not work here. It goes in between places, in between these. Now, if we put it someplace where it can't go, you'll get an error such as this one. So this is saying that the block date signed, which is what I just added, is not okay in its current position. It needs one of the following parent blocks. So one of these other blocks need to be before it, where before it everything is starting at the top and going down to the going down. So I will go like that, and now I will take it, and I want it to become part of the signer. So because the signer, this tab goes with this signer. So I could put it here, I could put it here, and then it works okay. Now at this point, you can see what happened is that we end up with nothing there, and so we need to put something else. So we go date signed, we need the anchor string, we need the X offsets, we need the Y offset. Where you put the attributes doesn't matter. Now you'll also notice that these attributes only work right here. Okay, so let's set this to be /sig1/. That's the anchor string. Oops, put it in the wrong place. Anchor string like that. And then the Y offset will be 25. I can hit the tab key and say the X offset is 20. And you see that it's filled it in over here. And now let's just try it out. Now, the API request builder at this point can be used for the envelopes create API method and the envelope views create recipient method, recipient view method. Those are the only two. So now we see the envelope looking good. Here's the sign here, and here's the date sign, today's date. And then I can click finish. And this will take us back to the API request builder. And now let's look at this top right-hand window here. This gives us the information about what happened. So first we sent the API request and create envelope, and we got back the envelope ID and everything that you would expect. Then we sent the recipient view API request, and we got back the response, including the long URL for the signing ceremony. And then finally, after we finished the signing ceremony, we got back the results, which come back as a query parameter. In this case, the query parameter is event with the value signing complete. So that's all good. That's what we expected. So now let's look a little bit more in some of the features and how the tool works. You'll notice that this red dot appeared here under save. That's because we modified the diagram, and the tool is reminding you to save it. So you can click Save Diagram. You can fill in this information to help remind you about what it is, and then you can hit Save Diagram to download it. And I'll cancel that right now. So that works, and that what you get is a file, a diagram file .dgm that you can then send to other people and enable them to try it out. And they would do that by clicking open and then opening that file. Okay, Now, something to mention is suppose you tried out that envelope and you notice, oh, that worked pretty well, except the font was wrong. So to me, a big benefit of this API request builder is you can try things out very quickly. So we can just add in a different font. We could change it to, like, say, the Garamond font. We could, here we go, date signed. We could change the size right here. And, we could make it much larger if we wanted. And then we could send the envelope and see what it looks like now. So remember that create envelope is essentially a keyhole through which virtually all of the e-signature capabilities and features of the Docusign e-signature system are exposed to you. And so they're all available for you to try out right here. Now, to make it easier, you don't have to start from that sort of simple diagram, but we've got many different examples that are all ready for you to use. And then you can, in any and every case, you can then build from these. So, for example, something to show you this responsive with responsive example, smart sections. If we open that up, you can see that this diagram, and it gives you a couple of instructions what to do here. This diagram is creating a much more elaborate create envelope. And what it does, if we try it out, we'll hit send envelope. This is using, first off, responsive signing. So it works automatically with screens of different widths, in particular, of course, mobile screens. And also through smart sections, you don't have to see everything all at once. So this is responsive. So if I now narrow this, you can see how it changed. And then if and that includes, now let's look at these smart sections. I can open that up. And then if I widen it out, you can see that it changed nicely. So the smart sections are all the options are up to you. In this case, I had them start with them collapsed. And so then you can open them. And then in this case, we need to sign, and then we'll hit finish. So creating a envelope that has smart sections, one way to do it is to provide the document as HTML, and including, you can see that right here. Whoops. Let's see, I want to make that wider. Okay, so this is the image. That's what we're sort of scrolling through right now. What I recommend for this kind of a large piece of text is you just do Control-All or Command-All and then copy it, and then put it into your favorite text editor. In this case, I'll use this one. And now we can also, let's see here, we can change this to be word wrap. And so you can see this is the HTML. And then once we get past it, we could pretty print this. And then this is where we've got, we're putting in the tabs in these exact places, things like that. So for that, I would copy it out and put it back in. But you can see that you can end up creating large create envelopes, and that all works very well. Now, let's look at some other features. First off, I'll just reset the diagram here to the default diagram. Now, over here under change language, we can show more than just JSON. So, for instance, Node. So what this is now doing here, this is this has automatically translated your diagram into JSON for use with Node and for use with the Docusign SDK for Node. And you can see it's creating a sign here tab, then it's creating the object, the array sign here tabs, plural. Then it's creating the tabs object and setting the sign here tabs attribute to the sign here tabs 1 and so forth. And this program is ready to run. In order to do so, first you download the framework, which are a couple of extra files. For instance, with C#, it's the project file, that sort of a thing. And then you download the example, that's this right here, and it's ready to go. Now, in terms of authentication, rather than including an OAuth example, right now what we've got is it includes the actual access, an actual access token that you can use. This is the same access token that was received when you logged into this tool. So this access token will last for, is good for 8 hours. And this is your default account ID, which again, this is your short form account right there. So you can run this program within the 8 hours and it will create the envelope. And if you don't want to do embedded signing, then for instance, right here, you can see this is the embedded signing part. And if I take it out, then there's no embedded signing and it'll just skip over that section. Now, so remember, you want to first download the framework and then you download the example and put it into the framework. Oh, what's happening here? Sorry, not sure what's going on here. There we go. Right. Okay, now let's talk about these different blocks. So you saw the date signed right here. And the, again, I'll reset this. Let's go back to JSON. Okay, so what's important to know is that each one of these blocks is an object. And so this is the name of the object is sign here. Now, sign here objects are put into this array for sign here tabs, but the name of the object is sign here. Now, it is often the case when you're trying to figure out where is the object in order to add it to your diagram that the names will be similar. So for instance, the sign here tabs gets a sign here object. But in other cases, that's not quite so straightforward. So for example, let's look at SMS delivery. And that's this one right here. Now, what happens here, here's recipient additional information, additional notification. And the object, so that's this right here, the object is added as one of the items to the additional notifications array. But the name of this object is not simply additional notification, singular. Rather, the name of the object is recipient additional notification. And so so if you're looking for the object and you're not finding it, what you can do is go to the Docusign, the Docusign Developer Center, and in the reference section for the e-signature API, you will find it. And I give an example of that in the documentation for the tool. So right here, additional notifications, you get the information from the Developer Center that the name of the object is recipient additional notification. And that's, and so then that tells you that you need to look for this object inside of the tool. Now, the way you do that, up at the top here, these are just a couple commonly used objects. Then under tabs, these are commonly used tab objects or objects used with tabs. And for each one of these, I've included the commonly used attributes. But sometimes you'll need to use either an attribute or an object that is not in this list. In that case, go to the A to Z complete index, where you will find every single object that can possibly be added to a envelope request. And notice here all of these items that start with the name recipient. So recipient attachment goes to an attribute that's probably called attachment, that kind of a thing. Also, each one of these here in the A to Z section contains every possible attribute. So if we look at date signed, which remember we were looking at before, you will see that that here under A to Z includes quite a few other attributes, everything that's possible to be added to the request. Okay, now you might also be saying to yourself, what about the documents? So the answer is that this is the list of documents that comes with the tool, but you can add your own. You click on documents. Here's the 3 that it comes with, but then you can add your own document, and that works out, and then use it. So once you add it, it will be then visible in this drop-down menu right here. It's often the case, if it's not a PDF, if it's something else, that you'll need to add the suffix here, such as HTML, if you decide to use an HTML document. And of course, you can have all of this, for instance, we can say duplicate, and then now we've got 2 documents in the envelope. Okay, let's talk about templates. And so with templates are a very important part of the Docusign eSignature feature set. So again, I'll just reset here. Now, suppose what you want to do is use a template, and you can either use a template within a composite template setup, or you can use it directly. Using it directly would be at the top level, create envelope, and here it is. So we could put that in there, and the name of it, these template names right here are the templates that are in your developer account at the time that you started the API request builder. So to use a template, first create it with the Docusign web app, and then start or restart the API request builder, and then it will appear here. Now, if you then save your diagram as a file, later on, you can give that file to somebody else. And when that diagram file is loaded, the template will be created in that person's account if it's not already present. And so the template rides along inside of the diagram file. So do documents, in fact, if you add your own document. And then that way they're available when someone opens the diagram file that you give them. We've got a number of just the usability features here. If you do Command Z or Control Z, that's undo. And if you do a Shift, that's redo. And so that works out nicely. You can see this context menu here of duplicate. You can add a comment. You can collapse the block like that. So if you want to add a comment to this block, you say add comment, you'll get a question mark there, and now you can add your comment. And then you close it by clicking again on the question mark. The comment will be saved with your diagram, and then when you send your diagram to somebody else, it will include the comment. Now, in addition to the comments, if you hover over a block, such as a name here, you will get the documentation from Docusign for that attribute or for that object. So here the ID of the template. If a value is not provided, Docusign generates the value. That Docusign will only generate a value if you're doing a in some uses of the template attribute. In our case of creating an envelope, you would be referring to a template that already exists. And that's why if you go like that, then it's in fact showing you the ID that's in your own local directory for you to that needs to be referenced for the diagram to work. Okay, so that's really about it. There's one final feature to show you, which is in some cases you start off with a JSON like this or something similar, and you want to change it and you want to see what the SDK version would be for whatever is your favorite language. So if we switch over, and this is going to be renamed, it's going to be called options. So if we switch over to JSON input, then here is a default JSON program. And again, you can change it, and you can see it's changing there. You probably wouldn't have it be as JSON. You'd do something else, I don't know, like C#. And so now looking for the, here it is, for the email subject, again, you can see that it's changing. Now, if you put in incorrect JSON, so for instance, if I leave off this brace, then you'll get an error. It'll show you the JSON here, not the C# anymore. And it says that it couldn't figure out what was going on. And the point at which the parser could not figure out what's going on is here in red, which is not so close to the brace, but hopefully gives you a clue. So we'll put the brace back, and now it gives us back C#. If we, I don't know, if we go like this, then it's a little bit more accurate, and we can figure out that we forgot the colon, that kind of a thing. So this is only this works from JSON to a SDK language. It does not work, it cannot take the JSON and turn it into blocks. I believe that that's possible to be done, but that software has not been written. So that's sort of a utility system. The intention is to be able to create things with the blocks. Okay, so let's have just a couple more slides, and I hope this has been of interest and you can be asking your questions. So, okay, so as I discussed, you need to find the right block, and the blocks are listed by the name of the object, not the attribute. The attribute is what you're sort of seeing in front of you here, like the attribute is signers, but the thing that's in here, which is an array of, in this case, signer objects, it's not always the same. Okay, so remember our goal one was to make it easy to do this kind of exploration of an API. So the solution to goal number one has quite a few steps. So first off, I decided to use Blockly, which is a open source library from our friends at Google, which is a terrific library and is actively developed by Google engineers. And also the community contributes as well, in fact. Okay, so number two was to decide to use what's called the builder pattern to add up to a complete object, which is the request object. So using the builder pattern here, each block affects the nearest prior appropriate object. And so sign here affects signer. Sign here, you can actually have tabs in a document object in some specific cases, but because signer is before document, even though sign here objects can be added to either, it will get added to the signer object. Okay, so the next is that the blocks spit out a program, and the program that they put out is in a format that is sometimes called Fluent. and sometimes called a chained format. So this is the actual software that gets spit out by the blocks. So for instance, this first one is adding an envelope definition attribute, but then we get into what's more often the case is adding an object. So this is adding the document object with the attributes of file name, file extension, document ID, corresponding to these three blocks plus the file name block here. And so this is what you get. And what happens is each one of these methods on the object returns an instance of the object. And so that's why it's called chained. So this is the dot is in JSON is to call the method on the object. So add envelope definition attribute is called on this object, and then it returns the object, and then it can be done again or call the add object method. Okay, so then what happens is that all of this gets fed into a program, which then spits out the JSON version. And that involves quite a bit of recursion. So all of this is open source, by the way, so you can see how it all works if you wish to. Now, to figure out what object belongs to what other object and so forth, the Docusign e-signature Swagger file is used, which we also open source, and so that's available to you. And it's automatically produced by our Docusign platform software. And there's a new version about once a month. So the overall architecture of the tool is that it's a single page application. It's written in React. As I mentioned, it uses Google library, the Google Blockly library, and there's no back end. The browser, the application running in the browser is directly calling the Docusign e-signature API by using what's called cores. You can ask questions about any of this. So the way we auto-program the API's SDKs is that the SDKs themselves are created by open source software called CodeGen. And that software uses, again, the Swagger file to create the SDKs. So then the API request builder uses recursion. Everything is all mechanically linked, and so it all works. Uses recursion to auto-program the SDK, and it starts with the deepest leaf nodes to make sure that those objects are then available for later reference. So in this case, here is the JSON source. The most deepest leaf node is what's most indented. That's the sign here tabs, which is an array of sign here tab objects. And so it's creating the sign here tab and then stepping through to create the complete program. So that's working well for these languages. With Visual Basic, there's no direct SDK access right now. So it creates at this point, it creates a big string for the JSON request. Now, good news is there's additional features that are all included beyond my #1 goal. It includes the API documentation that you saw. The request is shown as JSON. It auto-programs the SDKs, pre-build examples, and modify them. You can save your work. In particular, my goal is that you are able to share your examples to help other people. So it's available right now, API request builder.docusign.com. As I mentioned, it's also open source. Now, the open source version uses a different user experience. The product, the version from Docusign uses the Docusign user experience library. This one uses the Bootstrap React user experience library. Okay, so we are at the question period. Let's, Jeremy, how we doing?
So I think we're about to start getting some questions trickling in. I just sent over one. Can you see that one?
Yes. So the question is about which tabs can be added to the document. So that's a good question. And the answer is absolutely any and all tabs, because the complete complete set of possible objects is included. So the new Swagger file from the API is typically about once a month, and then it's used to create this. And so there's every single tab that the API supports is here. And some of these tab types can end up with sub-objects themselves, depending on what's going on. And all of that is here as well. So that's a good question. Let's see. Any other questions?
I see some questions coming in, as in people are typing their questions.
Okay.
But
okay, can a sender of an envelope add additional documents to the envelope after it's sent to multiple recipients? So the answer there is yes, you can do what we call correcting an envelope. And you need to make API calls to first put the envelope into what we call correct status. And then you can modify the documents and or delete documents. And then when you finish with the correct step, the correcting step, you would then release the correct lock. Now, the API request builder only does at this point, only does the create envelope step. What I typically suggest is that if you know what the documents will be ahead of time, it's best to get the whole envelope set up at the time that you send it out, at the time that you create it. But I realize that there are use cases where, for instance, perhaps depending on a signer's response, other signers later on will need to see different documents or something like that. So that kind of thing is possible, but it's tricky, and you'll need to make sure you get it all right. What I would especially be concerned about there is to make sure that the routing has stopped, so that after the first signer, the Docusign does not go on to the next signer until your software has updated the envelope as it needs to be set up. Let me see. Can this tool be used in reverse to import and verify existing manually written JSON? Yes. So what you could do is switch over to JSON mode. Like I said, this is being renamed to options. You would put in your JSON here, and then over here you would change to whichever language is your favorite, and then you would take this resulting program and run it and see if you could also I'm pretty sure you can just hit send envelope. Now, if you hit send envelope, this is where the recipient view request is set up. And this is again through looking at reset here. So let's try it out. Please sign the attached document. Now that's email. Let's move this over, say, to 120. And now I believe we can just send this, and we'll see whether if it works correctly. Okay, so you can see that works. So the JSON, when it's in JSON input mode, you can send out the JSON immediately as a envelope request. And if you include this extra bit of JSON down here, then it'll be a embedded signing. If you don't, then you'll get an email. We're about out of time. The last question is, what's the difference between the Docusign version as API Builder and the one on GitHub? Virtually none. The open source version is a little bit behind, so there's a couple of fixes and options, like the JSON input mode, in fact, which are not in the version on GitHub, but virtually everything else is there. And so you're welcome to try that out. Is status tracking available currently? Yeah, it depends on what you mean by status tracking. If you mean event notification, then the answer is yes. And so one of these options here, webhooks, right? So what this example does is, in fact, right here, event notification, you can put in a URL, such as one from webhooks.org or any of these other test systems. And then when you send this envelope, you'll receive the webhook status updates of whichever ones you're asking for. So I'm asking for the envelope event called sent, and I could have also asked for recipient events. And so these are all the different events that you can register interest in. Good question. Okay. I think that's it. So if you have more questions, then I gotta go. Okay, thanks. Come to the Ask Me Anything. The Ask Me Anything, I sent it on the channel right at the beginning. Thank you so much for coming. Take care.